I stood in the parking lot of the Sheraton in downtown Calgary, holding a tray of puff pastry appetizers I'd made at 4 in the morning, watching through the floor-to-ceiling glass as my parents shook hands with the Meridian Foods acquisition team. Nobody came to get me. Nobody even looked toward the door. My brother was in there, standing beside my dad in a navy suit he'd bought last week, laughing at something one of the suits said. He had a champagne flute in his hand. He looked like he belonged. I was the one who had built the thing they were selling. Let me back up. 8 years ago, I started Harvest Hive out of my apartment in Edmonton. I was 26, working part-time at a catering company and spending every free hour developing what I called a farm-direct meal kit, locally sourced ingredients, rotating seasonal menus, partnerships with small Alberta farms that couldn't break into the grocery distribution system. The idea wasn't complicated, but the execution took everything I had. My first supplier was a potato farmer in Lacombe who'd been getting squeezed by the big chains for years. I drove out to meet him on a Tuesday in November, the highway slick and the sky the color of old concrete, and I sat in his kitchen for 3 hours going over numbers. We shook hands. He was my first partner. I still have the photo from that day on my phone, me in my winter coat, grinning like an idiot beside his truck. By the time I had 6 farm partnerships and a functioning subscription model, I needed help. I asked my dad. That was the first mistake, but I didn't know it yet. My dad has always had a way of making himself the center of any room he walks into. He's not loud about it. He's actually quite quiet. But within a few weeks of joining Harvest Hive, he had introduced himself to every one of my farm partners as the founder. I heard it secondhand from the potato farmer in Lacombe. He'd called to ask if my dad was taking over. I told him no. I told him my dad was just helping with logistics, but logistics turned into procurement, and procurement turned into him negotiating contracts, and contract negotiation turned into him deciding he needed a co-founder title to protect the family's investment. There was no investment. He had helped me move 3 pallets of packaging materials with his pickup truck. I should have pushed back then. I know that now. But he was my dad, and every time I tried to raise it, he'd look at me with this particular expression. Not angry, just disappointed, like I was being paranoid, and I'd back down. He was good at making me feel like my concerns were the problem, not his behavior. My brother came on board 2 years later. He'd just finished a business degree at Mount Royal and had no interest in food farming or anything Harvest Hive actually did. But my dad brought him in to handle sales and growth, and suddenly my brother was in every meeting giving opinions on the product line, suggesting we drop 2 of our farm partners because the margins were too thin. The farm partners I had built relationships with for 3 years. He also had a habit of referring to the company in interviews. Yes, he started doing press without telling me, as our family business. Once, a profile piece in a Calgary business magazine described him as the driving force behind Harvest Hive's expansion into British Columbia. I was mentioned in paragraph 4 as the recipe developer. I did not develop recipes. I built the entire supply chain, the subscription platform, the logistics model, the partner agreements. I wrote the code for our inventory tracking system myself, learning as I went, because we couldn't afford a developer. But in that article, I was the recipe developer. My mom knew. She had to know. She was at the dinner table when I came home for Christmas that year and showed them the article, hands shaking, trying to stay calm. My dad said the journalist had gotten confused. My brother said I was overreacting. My mom looked at a plate and said, "Let's not ruin the holiday." That was the sentence that should have told me everything. I didn't leave. I kept working. I told myself it would even out, that the truth would be obvious to anyone who looked closely, that my parents wouldn't actually let it go this far. In year 6, Harvest Hive had just under $4 million in annual revenue, 42 farm partnerships across Alberta and BC, and a waitlist of 1,200 subscribers. A regional food distributor had approached us about a licensing deal. A Toronto-based impact investment fund had reached out about Series A funding. I had done that. Me, working from a home office with a whiteboard on the wall and a spreadsheet that had become so complex it crashed my laptop twice. That spring, my dad called a family meeting. He framed it as a strategic discussion. My brother was there. My mom made coffee. I drove in from Edmonton in a snowstorm 3.5 hours because I thought we were talking about the investment term sheet I'd been reviewing for 2 weeks. We were not talking about the investment term sheet. My dad had been in conversations with Meridian Foods, a national meal kit and grocery brand headquartered in Toronto, for 4 months, without telling me. He and my brother had signed a letter of intent. The deal was structured as a full acquisition. The number was $6 million. My dad slid a folder across the kitchen table like he was doing me a favor. "This is a great outcome for the family," he said. I looked at the folder. I looked at him. My brother was studying the ceiling. My mom was standing by the sink, not moving. "I didn't agree to this," I said. "You're being emotional," my dad said. "Not unkindly." That measured, quiet tone. "This is a business decision. I'm the majority shareholder," I said. "I hold 53%. You can't sign a letter of intent without me." There was a pause. My brother said, "We should talk to the lawyer." They had a lawyer. They had already talked to a lawyer, one they had retained without telling me, apparently to figure out how to structure the sale in a way that worked around my shares. What they had found, or thought they had found, was a clause in our shareholder agreement from 4 years ago, when my dad had pushed me to formalize his role, that gave the board authority to approve acquisitions by simple majority. The board was 3 people: my dad, my brother, and me, 2-1. They had voted without me present. My dad looked at me across the table and said in a voice so calm it scared me more than yelling would have, "The company is being sold. You'll receive your share of the proceeds. That's fair." I drove back to Edmonton in the dark. The snow had turned to freezing rain. I pulled over once on the QE2 just to breathe. I cried for about 10 minutes. Then I stopped. Then I started thinking. The shareholder agreement clause, I went through it that night with a highlighter and a mug of tea that went cold. They were right that the board could authorize an acquisition, but the clause had a condition they seemed to have missed, or decided to ignore. It required the acquirer to assume all existing contractual obligations of the company. And there was one contractual obligation that Meridian Foods was not going to want to assume. When I'd built the inventory and subscription platform, the software that ran every aspect of the business, the thing that made it actually work, I'd registered it separately, not under the Harvest Hive corporate entity, under a numbered company I'd incorporated 3 years ago before things got complicated because I'd read enough about startup acquisitions to know that keeping your core IP separate was smart. Harvest Hive had a licensing agreement with that numbered company. My numbered company, the one my dad and brother didn't know existed because I had never told them and they had never asked, because they had never actually looked closely at how any of it worked. The licensing agreement had a standard clause. In the event of a change of control of the licensee, the licensor had the right to terminate the agreement with 30 days' notice and reclaim the software. Meridian Foods was buying a meal kit company whose entire operational system, subscriptions, supplier management, logistics, inventory, could be pulled out from under it in 30 days by the founder they'd just tried to cut out. I didn't say anything for 6 weeks. I let the acquisition process move forward. I responded to emails. I participated in due diligence calls. I was professional and cooperative, and I answered every question Meridian's team asked. They were thorough. They asked about the technology platform. I directed them to the licensing agreement, which was on file. Nobody flagged it. The closing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at the Sheraton. Champagne reception after. My dad had invited the mayor's economic development liaison. My brother had posted a teaser on LinkedIn. I was not listed as a speaker. On the Thursday evening, I sent an email. It went to Meridian's CFO, their general counsel, and their CEO. I copied the acquisition team lead. I included the licensing agreement, the incorporation documents from my numbered company, and a clear, 1-page summary of what would happen to the platform on day 31 of the change of control if the licensing agreement was not renegotiated to reflect my actual role and equity in the new entity. I also included a proposed term sheet. My terms. What I actually wanted: a VP of technology role with appropriate equity in the Meridian subsidiary, a seat on the product committee, and a revised purchase structure that compensated me separately for the IP at independent valuation. Then I went to sleep. I slept better than I had in 2 years. At 7:15 the next morning, my phone started ringing. It was my brother. I didn't answer. Then my dad. I didn't answer. Then a number I didn't recognize, that one I picked up. It was Meridian's general counsel. She was very calm, very professional, and she asked me if I was available to speak before the closing. I said I was. We talked for 40 minutes. She had clearly been up since 5. She asked detailed questions about the licensing structure, the platform, what it would cost to rebuild versus license, the timeline. I answered everything. At the end, she said she'd need to speak with her team. I said I understood. An hour later, she called back and said the closing would be postponed. That was when I drove to the Sheraton. I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the parking lot for a while, watching through the glass. My dad arrived at 10, then my brother, then a few people from Meridian's team who looked confused. My mom came at 10:30 with a tray of pastries she'd made because she always brought food to events and she didn't know the event had changed. I walked in at 11. My dad saw me from across the lobby and his expression did something I had never seen it do before. It flickered. "What did you do?" he said. "It wasn't a question." "I protected what's mine," I said. My brother said my name in a tone that was meant to be warning, like I was a child about to embarrass the family at a restaurant. Meridian's lead negotiator walked over. He shook my hand. He said, "We've reviewed the licensing structure. We'd like to revisit the acquisition terms." My dad said, "This is a family matter." The negotiator looked at him politely and said, "It's also a legal matter." The next 3 weeks were not easy. My dad stopped speaking to me. My brother sent me a text that said I had nuked the family's financial future, and another one, the next day, that said I was no better than a corporate raider. My mom called twice. Both times she cried. Both times she said she just wanted us to be okay, that she didn't understand why I was doing this, that family was supposed to come first. I said, "You could have said that when they were erasing my name from the company I built." She didn't have an answer for that. I hired my own lawyer, a woman out of a firm in Calgary who specialized in IP and business disputes and who told me after reading everything that my position was strong. It took 4 more weeks of negotiation. Meridian didn't walk away. They wanted the company and they wanted the platform, and they understood that the platform was mine. In the end, we restructured the deal. The acquisition went through at a revised valuation of $7.2 million, reflecting the platform's value being properly accounted for. I received 40% of the total proceeds directly, separate from the shareholder distribution, as consideration for the IP licensing transition. I was offered a 2-year consulting contract with Meridian to lead the technology integration with an option to convert to a full-time VP role. I took the consulting contract. I didn't take the VP offer. I wanted to be able to leave on my terms. My dad received his share of the proceeds. So did my brother. They both made more money from that deal than they had ever made from anything in their lives. Money that came directly from a company that existed because I had driven to Lacombe on a November afternoon 8 years earlier and convinced a potato farmer to trust me. My dad called me the week after closing. He wanted to get lunch. I said I'd think about it. I haven't called back. My mom emails occasionally. Short notes, checking in. I reply when I can. Last month, she mentioned that my brother had started a new venture, something in the wellness space, and that my dad was helping him. She wrote that she hoped I was doing well and not holding on to negativity. I read that email twice. Then I closed it and went back to work. What I'm doing now is mine in a way that Harvest Hive eventually wasn't. I'm a year into a new project, direct supply chain consulting for small Canadian food producers who want to access institutional buyers without getting flattened by the distribution system. It's slower. There's no family money in it, no built-in help, no safety net. But every contract I sign has my name on it. My name, my decision, my work. The Lacombe farmer reached out a few months after the Meridian deal closed. He'd heard through the agricultural network about what had happened. That version was vague on details but clear on the shape of it. A founder who'd nearly lost her company to her own family. He said he wasn't surprised. He said the best people he'd ever worked with were the ones nobody else had taken seriously yet. I'm still not sure if that was meant as a compliment, but I'm choosing to take it as one. There's something nobody tells you about being wronged by your own family. The hardest part isn't the betrayal itself. It's the period after, when you have to decide what kind of person you're going to be about it. Whether the anger is going to become the whole story, or just one chapter. I chose one chapter. I drive a different car now. Nothing fancy. A used Subaru I bought in January, reliable enough for highway driving in an Alberta winter. I don't have a parking lot view of someone else's celebration. But I'm not standing outside anymore either.